My name is Stephen Kensley, and I am a meetup organizer. For the June meetup, Jonathan Lowsley is going to teach us about organizational patterns and what kind of behaviors they generate. He's also going to show us how these patterns influence, support, interact, or prevent adoption of effective DevOps practices. Jonathan is a vice president of operations at a technology-infused company in the automotive industry with experience in several other organizations. He's also a fixture of the Phoenix DevOps scene. With that, let's transition to Jonathan. The beginning of the recording was clipped a bit, so hear Jonathan start right off.
First thing to start off with is DevOps, just sort of what is it? I think everybody here has a different idea of what it is, a different definition. So to put us all on the same page for this particular talk, I'd like to use this very common definition. It's the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increases an organization's ability to deliver applications and services at high velocity. So really the cultural philosophies is going to be a lot about what we talk about today. So what does it look like? What does DevOps look like? It turns out DevOps is organization specific, meaning it looks different at every single company. There's no one right way to do DevOps, but there are some ways that are definitely more successful than others. I find that there's often a focus on tools and practices without a focus on people and culture. And so we want to kind of close that gap today. So in this talk, I'd like to explore the different evolutionary stages of organizations throughout time. I want to look at popular DevOps org structures and how they relate to those evolutionary stages, and really touch on the need for a focus on people. So in 2014, Frederic Laloux published this book called Reinventing Organizations. It's an amazing book. It'll change the way you think about the world and your organization and your career. But in this book, Laloux establishes that there are basically 5 different stages in human organizational evolution. And he uses colors to describe those different stages, sort of colors as a shorthand so that we can refer to them and have a vocabulary with each other about what each color means and how that relates to this particular evolutionary stage of an organization. He says that organizational types evolved by sudden leaps. He did tons of research, his own research, as well as aggregated other people's research into this book. And you can really tell that the evolution of ideas and new mindsets sort of emerge, which changes the whole structure of an organization. At every new stage, there's a significant cultural shift, and evidence suggests that we are on the precipice of making a new leap into a new type of organization that hasn't existed ever before. So we're going to go through these 5 Laloux colors and the 5 stages, and just keep in mind as we go through, there's some positive and also negative implications, maybe for each one. So the first Laloux stage, he would say, is the red impulsive worldview. Some examples of organizations that have this worldview are mafia, street gangs, tribes, and founder bosses leading startups. So the impulsive worldview emerged about 10,000 years ago. And there are 2 big breakthroughs. The first one is the appearance of division of labor. So instead of people working in small family units to do everything that's involved in carving out a life for themselves, they can specialize in a new sector or a new role, and they don't have to learn every role needed in the organization. Another breakthrough is sort of this idea of top-down authority, where there's a single leader that controls everything. In this stage, the glue of the organization is loyalty and fear. Fear meaning you're scared of what will happen if you disobey the one central top-down type of leader, and you also build up a lot of loyalty to them. In a time marked by egocentric and impulsive behavior, the subjects in the organization require constant enforcement of rules from sort of this top-down leader. They have a crude use of forceful power. These type of orgs don't scale very well in terms of size, but it did allow them to succeed in highly chaotic environments. If you think about 10,000 years ago being very chaotic in human history, and this type of organization was well suited to that environment. I also threw together some jargon slides here so we can kind of use some extra descriptor words to really understand the 5 colors. So here's some red jargon for you, where the metaphor for this type of organization is the wolf pack. It's marked by chaos, fear, tyranny, iron fist, enforced order, power struggle. You might see this come up in the words micromanagement. That's sort of what happens today if somebody's leading in this way. So moving on to the next evolutionary stage in organizational history is Amber. It's the conformist worldview. Some examples are militaries, religious institutions, government agencies, public school systems. In Amber, the Amber worldview sort of emerged around 4,000 years ago. One of its big breakthroughs was a repeatable process. The idea that we do this one thing this one way, and we always do it this way, and now we train people to do it this way, this role, so that it's always the same. Along with that process comes knowledge that's embedded in the organization. And also a breakthrough is a stable organizational chart. Instead of having one ruler and all of the people underneath it from red, you sort of have now many different hierarchies or many different levels in a single hierarchy, all kind of building up. So this was the age of agriculture. There are states and empires emerging, organized religion. The glue of the organization, what keeps people together and working together, is guilt and shame. So you feel guilty if you're not conforming to this type of hierarchy, and you feel shame as well if you're sort of coloring outside of the lines in this organization. So there's this need to fit in, wear the right clothes, do what's expected, and think what is the right thoughts. So there's clear ranks in Amber where they stack up in a definitive hierarchy, and this type of organization is well suited for a world of certainty and stability. Some of the Amber jargon that we could look at is the metaphor is a pyramid or an organizational chart. You've got all these sort of descriptor words here to understand it as well. Hierarchy, structure, doing something the right way, staying in your lanes, well-defined roles. Also, there's this emergence that any person can be replaced, so that the knowledge is now embedded in the organization. You can start, adding other people in, either, because they left the company or, were left the organization or something like that. And emerges also like punishments for lack of compliance, because this is all about conforming to the structure set forth by the organization. So the orange worldview is the achievement worldview in the Laloux model. Some examples are publicly traded companies and corporations, global brands, public universities, and we'd say most companies today take on this sort of orange achievement worldview. This type of org emerged around the last 200 years. One of the big breakthroughs was this idea surrounding innovation. If you can go faster than your competitors, and if you can build a better product than your competitors, you're going to win. And in the orange worldview, winning is profiting, money. Orange is all about profits and money. They invented departments like research and development, marketing, product management, project teams, all for the simple role of pushing creativity and innovation forward to try and drive the company. Another emerging breakthrough was accountability. This is where sort of top-down executive management now sets goals. People are expected to reach those targets and to stay on those goals. And meritocracy emerged in the orange worldview, meaning that good ideas transcend rank, and anyone can sort of move up the ladder by having enough creative and good ideas. We now know in our society that a true meritocracy maybe does not work, but the ideal and the idea of a meritocracy emerged in Orange, the Orange Laloux stage. So Orange companies profit by tapping into intelligence, creativity. There's a lot of focus on leadership and mentoring because people are expected to move up in rank. And this, the business practices that are taught in MBA programs are very much Orange oriented. This is all what you get if you go get an MBA. It's from this worldview, this point of view. And we introduce rewards now for doing well. And what are rewards in the Orange point of view? It is money, bonuses, some sort of like stock shares. We have this idea that Amber just had the stick and now Orange has the carrot and the stick. Instead of just being punished for doing poorly, now you are extrinsically incentivized, meaning somebody outside yourself incentivizes you with money or some sort of thing that you want in order to do a good job. So Orange jargon here. The metaphor is organizations as machines. So people are resources, they're cogs in the gears, keeping everything together. You have all of these words like efficiency and effectiveness. People talk about information flows, bottlenecks, engineering. All of that is sort of process improvement related. Orange is the area of experts. You hire subject matter experts to come in and tell you exactly how to plan out what you want to do, and they make blueprints to go forward with. Goals, objectives, OKRs, targets, KPIs, incentives. I just want to read all of those words. Some of you might have gotten really excited to hear those words, and others might just cringe at those words. So Laloux really taps into who you are individually and how you were brought up in your career, and you might identify positively or negatively with some of these words. But remember, Orange is all about achieving and all about targets and all about the individual. Budgets, planning, strategy. There becomes this materialistic obsession in an Orange stage where the total goal of everything is just profit and shareholder value for public companies. And there's this idea of command and control. The CEO or some top level executive says, we need to do this and this is how we're doing it. And now it rolls down and cascades down through different teams and departments. So this is all sort of, should be familiar to all of us. I bet we've all worked for an Orange company. Maybe you do now. Maybe you work for an Amber company. Who knows? So moving on now to what Laloux would call the pluralistic worldview. Green companies here. The green Laloux color. So some examples are Southwest Airlines, Ben & Jerry's, nonprofits, NGOs. These type of companies emerged in the last 50 years. There's this idea that people are now not cogs anymore and that everyone has a place. There's definitely more of a focus on the group and not the individual. One of the big breakthroughs here was empowerment. There's sort of a natural dislike for hierarchies in green, and so the org chart still exists because there's still that pattern of organization, but it is definitely downplayed, and employees are really empowered to help make decisions. You might see teams with distributed decision-making and authority. All of that rolls into empowerment. We see a breakthrough of values-driven culture, the idea that values inspire employees and provide guidance to make good decisions. There's this belief that employees are naturally good, and if you treat them like adults, they're going to do good, and there's the lower, less emphasis on rules and policies. And now we see stakeholder value come out, this concept that instead of focusing on profits alone, you focus on your customer and delivering a product that your customer loves. and the idea that the business has a responsibility to employees and customers, suppliers, the community at large, and profits sort of come later as a nice to have. Green companies know that if they focus on customers, they're going to make money anyway. But their primary goal is not to make the money, focus on the customer. We see the emergence of servant leadership. Instead of managers in sort of an orange sense, tell everybody exactly what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And here's your deadlines and here's your goals. Servant leadership evolves where you are an employee and you have something to do and your manager's not sitting there telling you how to do it. They're asking you, how can I help you achieve what you want to do? How can I help you, get over this hump or fix this problem? How can I empower you and help unblock you on where you're stuck? So the idea of servant leadership, leading with inspiration, a lot of importance of soft aspects of management, coaching teams, talking about this type of stuff with them. Agile, the agile movement evolved out of this green way of thinking. This happened in the last 50 years. Some green jargon for you. The metaphor in green is the family, where teams are tightly knit. There's a focus on the team instead of the individual. There's this idea of commitment instead of compliance. Instead of doing something just because there's a rule, you want to do it because you have the values that the company has. And so your values really align with the company and you have a commitment. It's like unenforced rules with buy-in instead of having some thick employee manual that says everything that you have to do every time. Shared values, the idea of stakeholders, not shareholders. So you really are driving to make sure that your stakeholders, i.e. your customers and people who are using your product, really love it. And those are the people that matter the most, not everybody who holds stock in your company. Green is huge to employee happiness and engagement, and we see the emergence of cross-functional teams. So now trying to put different areas of business and different roles on the same team to even better collaborate together. And there's a big focus on company culture. The last Laloux color we'll talk about is the teal color. And you can use teal in a Google search and it will come up with all sorts of business practices that are teal. So it's not just Laloux saying this, it's sort of an idea that's taken off. So this is the evolutionary worldview. Some example companies here. There's not very many teal companies out there, but their business practices are so different and so interesting that it's super compelling what they're trying to do. So the evolutionary worldview is starting to emerge now, maybe in the last 10 years. There's this profound idea of individual and collective unfolding, an idea of a company discovering where it wants to go and where the business is pulling it. What direction is the business and the environment pulling it in, and this unfolding of the future and discovering that both as an employee and as a company. One of the big breakthroughs is self-management. So if orange and amber have definite hierarchical structures, green sort of downplays that, teal throws that out the window. They replace the hierarchical structure with empowered and fluid teams. Employees start taking ownership and responsibility and have a lot of autonomy. Another breakthrough is wholeness. The idea of being whole at work, being the same person at work that you are at home. There's no difference anymore. You don't have to put on your professional self to go to work. You don't have to wear different clothes. For most things, you can show up as yourself. And the idea of an evolutionary purpose, the sense of direction for the organization. Organizations realize that they can't predict and control the future and the environment. Instead, they learn where the organization naturally wants to go and that they follow that calling. Some might say AWS did this. Amazon figured out we have an infrastructure platform here. This is kind of compelling. Maybe someone else would like to use our infrastructure platform. Maybe billions of people would like to use it and decided that AWS was a great idea. Inner rightness as a compass. So The idea that we let go of preconceived ideas of where you should go and what you should do, and just use your values as a compass. Also, taming the ego, big in Teal. You listen and follow your inner values rather than striving to be somebody that somebody else wants you to be, or striving to do something that somebody else wants you to do. You're becoming your true self, and you're exemplifying that in your work at work. So here's Teal jargon for you. It is a living organism. It is constantly changing. The teams are constantly reinventing how they work and how they collaborate together. These are very high trust organizations. They have safe spaces, like meetings are really safe to talk in, to disagree in respectfully. They have distributed decision-making authority. There's a lot of psychological ownership, knowing that as an employee, you want to achieve whatever thing you have set out to, because you own that and you owe it to your teammates to be able to do that successfully, or get their help if you are struggling with it. There's a lot of reflection. You could see this maybe with like a retrospective after a sprint, if you're a developer, where you look back and say, what are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's not working? Because guess what? We can change it. We're in a Teal organization, and we have the ability to do things differently and how we see fit to how we want to work. Doing retrospectives in like an Amber company would never work, because it's so strict and it's so stratified and static that there's no way that you could change something that comes out of that. So there's a lot of introspection, reflection, individuals and teams. There's this idea of true work-life balance. If Orange says like, you got to stay late because I want this budget report and you got to do that, Green would say something like, oh, we're your work family. And instead of like having a true work-life balance, Green would be like, oh, you know, now you have two families. We need you a family at home, and we need you a family at work. And here's a ping pong table, here's a beer tap, and here's dinner every night to get you to commit to this other family. So Teal kind of tames that a little bit and says, all right, you can do whatever you want on whatever your schedule is, as long as you're, you know, showing outcomes and driving value. So it downplays that like sort of work-life integration that Green tried to get, and it says, okay, let's have a real work-life balance here. And of course, customer delight. Teal organizations are driven by a higher purpose of their customer. They know that they're working for the customer, and they want to do great things for the customer. And if they understand that if they just focus on the customer and deliver the best value to the customer, they're going to succeed. So here are some Russian nesting dolls. Laloux's model is much like Russian nesting dolls, in that the higher evolved types of organizations still contain aspects of the lower or previous stages. Sometimes they're downplayed, like Green still has hierarchy, but it's downplayed. We saw the emergence of division of labor in red, but obviously there's still division of labor in all of the stages. So much of them sort of stack up together, and an organization like Teal might choose to implement a green or an orange business practice in some areas, or for some purposes, or even for some amount of time. If you have a production outage, what do? We name an incident manager to run everything. That person has fear, they have loyalty, they are the person running the show, because in chaos we need a fast action, and we understand that that person shouting out orders and moving us towards a resolution is the best way to go about that. So a Teal organization might use red to its advantage in some situations. Now, if you have somebody sitting over your shoulder telling you exactly how to do it every single day, and not an emergency chaotic situation, that's a huge problem, right? That's micromanagement. So you can use it for good or for evil, so to speak. Anyway, they contain each other. So after talking about Laloux, I'd really like to explore some DevOps topologies and how it sort of overlays with the Laloux cultural model. So by topology, I mean a visual representation of what DevOps might look like in your company or in an organization. There's this great website, DevOpsTopologies.com, highly recommend it. There's a lot of visual aids and Venn diagrams to sort of explain how DevOps might look in different organizations. And actually the authors are taking the content from that website and they're releasing a book on it, I think this year. So the next set of slides will be pulling from this. So as we go through the Laloux model and the topologies, I'd like to look at it or like think about it in a couple different ways. The first way that you could see it, that the Laloux color of the organization influences the type of DevOps topology that they try and use. And then this is directly related to the success or failure of their DevOps implementation. So that's one way that you could look at it. An orange company chooses an orange suited DevOps model and they go like that. Another way to think about this is that a specific DevOps topology is best suited for organizations with a particular Laloux color. So maybe you have this idea of fully shared ops and dev responsibilities, and that's your DevOps topology, and that's going to be really good in alignment with like a Teal company or something. So there's a couple different ways to look at it. Obviously, it's not set in stone. They're totally different ideas, but I see a lot of overlap between them. So any Laloux color can use any DevOps pattern. However, the organizational values need to evolve and align with the DevOps values in order to implement DevOps correctly. Some might call this buy-in.
Right.
So here's our first example. We see ops embedded in a dev team. The dev team still has the dev focus, but there's a person in there that also does ops. I kind of see this as the Laloux red color. You've got one group with conflicting goals, i.e. operations and development. There's a lot of power struggles and resource contention because you're not treating ops as its own thing. You're sort of downplaying the importance of IT operations, and there's no appreciation for this ops type of specialty here. This might be a great model for chaos or a rapidly changing, unsure environment. Startups might start like this, where you have a dev manager or somebody who knows nothing about infrastructure making infrastructure decisions. Strong authority over infrastructure because you don't have 100 people in your company. You have 5 people in your company. So this might be good, for that area. The long-term success of this is low, but you could use this to bootstrap a company. Next one I want to talk about is just classic IT, no DevOps. Journey back 30 years in time, 20 years in time, the idea of DevOps didn't even exist. You have a development silo, an operations silo, neither of them talk to each other, and this is classic old school IT. I think this really is exemplified by the Laloux Amber stage, where you have this absence of DevOps. Developers kind of throw the code over the wall of confusion. If you've heard that DevOps term before. And then ops people just have to figure out how to deploy the software, how to run it. There's just no collaboration, no talking. Deeply siloed. And then the teams are very separated by a hierarchy. You can't go and talk to somebody else about, some problem that you're trying to solve in operations land. You have to escalate it up, to somebody else, and they've got to talk to their boss, and finally some bosses work together on the same level. So there's this sort of like separation by hierarchy. See this a lot in government, state and local education, and old organizations without like software focus. The idea of IT as a cost center. So classic IT. Here's a good antitype. Antitype meaning you see it, but it doesn't work. So you see this out there in the DevOps world, but you'll have low to zero success with your DevOps transformation by using this topology. We still have dev silo, we still have ops silo, and now we have a third silo to not communicate with called the DevOps team. So maybe you've seen like companies with a DevOps team or something. I'd say this is still amber because it's siloed. Maybe orange because orange is like, hey, I'm trying to innovate. I'm trying to, to try this DevOps thing. So let's start a DevOps team. That sounds good. And it's just, it comes from a place of like not really knowing how to implement DevOps or like what DevOps is. So you still have the departments with little collaboration. This might be like people use tools, but there's no focus on people or process, or the focus that is on process is only in that center silo, and there's no thought of that outside that silo. The next two antitypes are sort of mirror images of each other. This is where you still have a dev team and an ops team, but hey, guess what? We grab a developer and we say, you're a DevOps person now. You do DevOps. Ops still does ops, but you do DevOps and you're on the dev team. The opposite of that, of course, is rebranding your sysadmin, saying like, hey, you were really great at being a sysadmin and now you are a DevOps. You're the DevOps person and you get to write the DevOps code and think about the DevOps stuff, and you still have this dev silo over here. So these two are sort of mirror images of each other. Whether you put that responsibility solely on one team or solely on the other team, it's still siloed. You have developers using DevOps tools or sysadmins using DevOps tools. There's just no involvement from the other team. There's no collaboration. This is also an incorrect implementation of DevOps, meaning it will fail after some time. So now let's look at a couple of successful implementations. So this is, dev and ops finally have some collaboration. You have people from both teams, you have an understanding, you have open lines of communication between them. And I'd really like to think of this as sort of Laloux's green stage, where dev and ops have close collaboration. There's full adoption of the ideas and practices and philosophies that we should all share with DevOps. It really empowers both dev and ops to work on each other's stuff and to be interested in each other's stuff. I cannot tell you how great it is when I have a software developer who is, I don't know, I'll just use this term, but like ops aware. Like ops aware is great. And if you're a systems engineer, it is great to be like software aware. You don't have to be an expert in that. We have an expert in that. We have a team of experts in that. But you got to be aware of each other's problems. It builds empathy for each other. You can work in each other's code base. In fact, better yet, it might as well be the same code base. You're empowered to make changes on each other's work through the use of pull requests, for example. You're involved, if you're an ops person, you're involved in planning changes in the infrastructure life cycle. You're aware of upcoming changes to the operations of new features that are going out. You're well involved in the software delivery life cycle. So there's perpetual involvement, not just like, hey, I need some servers to run my code on. Like, that's the bare minimum. That's day one. But there's this continual involvement with the operations of that software and continual collaboration with that team to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So finally, we see a focus on tools, processes, and people. You could take a sentence like tools, processes, and people, a phrase like tools, processes, and people, and break those words down into Laloux colors. Tools being amber, process-driven being orange, and people being green. So you now have a new lens. I digress, but like you can look at the world now through these different Laloux colors. Even just single words can have meaning to you now. So there's this, the next topology is the fully shared dev and ops responsibility. There's much overlap between the two. I see this really as a Teal type of stage here, where you got dev and ops roles, they're on the same team. If you believe in the word full stack, this might be where it belongs. So everyone's highly focused on a shared purpose. You've got, of course, the full adoption of DevOps practices and the philosophy. I think this is pretty good. This is well suited for product teams with a single shared purpose. So everybody's sort of focused and working towards a customer product. I see that being very successful. And the cross-functionality doesn't have to stop with dev and ops, right? Once you get over that barrier, once you have the idea that like, oh, software, it's just more than writing code. We have to operate the code. Once you get over that hump and you involve ops people in the software delivery lifecycle, now that's like the barrier to entry. That's easy. Why not involve a data science person? Why not involve an InfoSec person? Once you get to this level, it's easy to understand the customer value that comes from bringing in different people, different expertise, and sitting them together and collaborating together. As long as the team doesn't get too big, you can still work in a cross-functional way and be one of these ever-changing sort of living organism type of teams. I'll put one last one up here, the DevOps Center of Excellence. There's not a slide, there's not an image for this on DevOps Topology, so I just kind of drew some arrows here, but I think you still have Dev and Ops in collaboration together. Where I see this being really helpful is when you have operations people who are very great at understanding DevOps practices and philosophies. And when you go and send them out onto other teams to work with those other teams for a period of time. So you might decide to take an infrastructure person and sit them onto a Scrum team of software developers doing a product, and they can sort of sprint with that team and add on infrastructure value to ultimately the customer, but also, to the software team itself. I think it represents Teal a lot because you can rotate people through. If you have 20 different software products and 5 systems engineers, you're going to get a lot of use of rotating them in and out based on where the software product is in its life cycle. You get a lot of adoption by product teams. You use it as a chance to coach and to train other people in things like continuous integration and continuous delivery, other DevOps practices. So you can embed people in these cross-functional teams. But the operations people or whoever you put on those teams still have their own little tribe to come back to and gain support from. So they might, the software team might say like, oh, we really want to, do Elasticsearch, and the person might come back to their ops people and they might say something like, oh, yeah, like, have you guys ever set up Elasticsearch before? Like, how easy is it? Should we be using this? And sort of rely on infrastructure systems experts to help each other out on software teams. Really, this is an example of reacting to infrastructure needs as software products change. So as the software product adds on extra resources, just responding to that with new or different or replacing infrastructure as you go. So that's sort of Laloux and how it relates to the two different DevOps topologies you might encounter. So I'd really like to talk just a little bit more here about Teal practices and Teal businesses. Teal practices foster engagement. Employee engagement is huge in Teal organizations. This is a 2018 Gallup poll for United States employees, United States workers. Only 34% feel that they are engaged at work. Only a third. A half are disengaged, and you got 13% that are actively disengaged. So engaged is you love what you do. You go to work, you're excited, you work with great people, and that makes it so much easier to focus on your work, do your job, and you just love it. Most days, we'll say. Disengaged, you're just phoning it in, you're collecting your paycheck, you don't care whether or not there's success in your company, and you're just trying to like get by. That's like half of people right now. And of course, 13% are actively disengaged. This is like the office-based folks who are like actively trying to undermine the company. They want to exfiltrate your IP. They want to, hurt your customers, and they're, actively trying to mess with your company because they're so upset. They're angry, they're disengaged, and they might not be working for an organization that they really would be able to thrive in and have the support that they need. Anyway, these numbers are huge because if Teal practices foster engagement, we know that engagement leads to productivity. Even if you're just like an orange person sitting here reading this, you're like, gosh, think about how much profits we're losing. If we could get 2/3 of our employees more engaged, think about how much more profits we could do. And if you're green, you're just like, why are these people so unhappy at work? How can we build a better workplace environment for them? And if you're teal, you say all of those things, and you also say, like, we have a higher purpose here of serving customers. So productivity, however you look at it, this slide is scary in terms of productivity. I'd say that Teal practices reinforce DevOps values. In fact, I'd say that DevOps itself is a manifestation of this Teal mindset starting to emerge in our technology society. So wherever you are in the process of DevOps, or your DevOps adoption, or whatever type of organizational structure or pattern you're using, I'd say that there's still some ways to incorporate some Teal practices in. So let's take a look at a couple of these here. Autonomy. This is a big Teal practice, a big Teal word here. So on the team level, this could be deciding the direction of the solution that they think is best, letting teams decide how they want to solve problems, and trust that the best decisions are going to come from the ground up, not the top down. The people who are close to the business doing the job that they're doing, they're going to have the best idea about decisions that affect that area of the business, not a out-of-touch executive. Not saying that all executives are out of touch, but the closer you are to the actual work, the better your decisions will be surrounding that work. On a personal level, this might be getting to focus or choose to focus on what to work on. If you work in a ticketing system, you get to pick what your tickets are. You get to say, like, hey, I'm really interested in this. I'd like to try it out. Employees can suggest and run with an idea for improvement. Like, hey, I really see it. Sunday at 4 a.m., we have this blip in traffic. Do you mind if I take a couple extra hours or days and kind of figure that out, see how we can change that? Employees are encouraged and should be suggesting different ways to improve. And that comes from the employee themselves, not from some manager who sees and does everything. So this doesn't mean no managing. You still need a support structure for employees. But if you are a manager, set the desired outcome or the direction and let the team figure out how to get there. So just saying, like, this is the desired outcome. This is how we write Agile stories. If you're familiar with Agile, we say, as a customer, I would like to be able to do X, Y, and Z because it will help me in these ways. That is a very green way of thinking. That's a teal way of thinking, where we say, like, set the outcome and then let the team or let the individual figure out how to get there. Another term is eyes-on, hands-off leadership, meaning you sit in the passenger seat. Your eyes are on the road, but you're letting your team drive, or you're letting the person that you're mentoring or you're peer programming with, you let them kind of lead the way, but you're right there. You can let them swerve on the road. You can let them go into the ditch a little bit. You're there to grab the wheel if they're about to drive off the cliff. So, eyes on, hands off leadership. Mastery, another big deal concept. Allow people to become experts in something they love. Don't build a homogenous team of people that do everything kind of okay. Like, let people become experts in what they want to. Let the team roles naturally develop and foster a deepening for the team roles and team members to develop something that they enjoy. So as a manager, you should feel very, like you need to watch where everything's going and make sure that you see like, oh, this person's really developing an interest in like multi-threaded Python. What sort of ways can we let them run with that? Or this person is very interested in writing unit tests. Should they be involved in the rest of the code base? Yes. Should they understand the rest of the code base? Yes. But if they're really great at this one thing and they love doing it, then let them do that most of the time, or figure out a percentage that works for you. And if you're an employee working on a team, you can say things like, hey, I really love doing X, Y, and Z. Do you mind if I take that? I'm really trying to hone my skills, or take tickets that help me learn this thing that I want to get great at. Purpose. Purpose is a big word. It means a lot of different things. Make sure the team has the why behind your doing it, why you're doing something before you roll it out to them. And if you're a member of the team, make sure that you feel safe enough in a meeting to ask why. Why are we doing this way? I have some questions about this. Can we talk through them? The purpose of the company and the purpose of the individual should change as the company goes through time. The business will always shift, and what direction it's going in will always change. So you need to reevaluate the purpose as you go and react to the needs of the software product. Trust, high trust organizations, a lot of trust in Teal, making sure you trust people to do the right thing because they naturally want to do the right thing. Making sure that people are trusted to do the work that you want them to as a teammate or as somebody that you're working with. So develop this high trust organization, the trust in your meetings to where people are okay to respectfully disagree with each other. Speaking of meetings, there's a couple of Teal practices. You don't have to take them away if you don't want. Maybe you do something like it, but I just grabbed two practices from how Teal companies run meetings. One is Tinkerbells. They look like this. So when you walk into a meeting, a single person grabs the bells off the table and they sit down, and their role during the meeting is to ring the bells if they feel that people are speaking from a place of fear or a place of anger or a place of ego or capitalizing on people's time. So they're there as sort of a referee to remind everybody, hey, there are some shared values we have as a team to work with each other. So they ring the bells. Everybody waits in the meeting 30 to 60 seconds until the bell, you can no longer hear the bells again, and then you can resume your meeting. If you are in very contentious meetings, this practice will definitely help. And then after a while, you may not even need the bells. Maybe somebody will just reach for the bells, and whoever is being angry will just sort of walk it back and figure out a better way to be more respectful and to voice their opinion. Or maybe you don't need this anyway because you've built a Teal culture anyway that says like we should all be great at meetings together. And there shouldn't be very many meetings. Another one is empty chair. You can take when you walk into a meeting room, you leave an empty chair at the head of the table. At any time, anybody in the meeting can stand up, walk to the chair and sit down in the chair, and they can speak from the point of view of the organization. So you can go and sit in the chair and say, I hear everybody talking here and you're all agreeing very nicely, but as the organization, I feel like I would be concerned about XYZ. That could be like the budget. That could be like, I'm worried about losing customers because this new feature is XYZ. So you can take and assume the role of the organization in the empty chair for a moment in time, just to voice an opinion like, hey, we don't have like upper management here. There's no such thing as upper management. Or if there is, like, they're not here in this meeting talking about what sort of node package we want to use. But as a representative for the organization in this moment, I see some problems with this. It'll help build better decision making. So empty care practice. Ground rules for engagement, all good meeting stuff. Sparse hierarchy. We know that hierarchy cannot cope with complexity. And when you have a giant, large hierarchy like the United States government or something like that, where it's just very, very complicated and like amazingly complex tree, it cannot move very fast at all. It's very slow to react to changes in the environment. In fact, what did we say about the Amber worldview? We said the Amber worldview is that the environment is stable and unchanging. It's blind to the fact that we live in 2019 where everything is complex, everything is always changing all the time. So Teal organizations use sparse hierarchy. There's little or no power dynamics within people because, there's just like, there's nothing to argue over. There's no like rank to argue over, so there's no power dynamics. Self-correction, here's one. You let teams have involvement in helping individuals grow and improve. So allow people to make mistakes. This is people are gonna make a few mistakes here and there. That's okay. Let them make mistakes. And lead with a values culture where people feel like their behavior doesn't really fit in with everybody else's behavior, and let them self-correct for that. Blameless culture might go in here if we're talking about not focusing on who did it and why did they do it, and anger and blame. Saying like, yes, that thing happened, accepting it, and focus on solving the problem and correcting ways that it happened in the first place. So mistakes are good. We learn from mistakes. Let people make mistakes and let them try and correct them. And when they don't correct them, let members of the team kind of coach them towards a better way of doing something. The advice process. This is a really cool Teal practice where you can get some decision-making done without the overhead of consensus. So in an orange organization, a leader from the top says, we're going to do it this way. We're going to do this. This is how you do it. I want it done by these goals. Here's your budget. Here's the plan. And then the team goes away and does something. And that decision is made for them. Those decisions are not as good decisions that are bubbled up from the team. So in the green way of thinking, green teams are like empowered to make their own decisions, but they really get stuck on consensus. So part of green is feeling like part of this big group, and we all have to agree on the same thing and the same way to do it. And so they get kind of bogged down in consensus. So Teal has kind of plays the middle road here, where anybody, the advice process is this. Anybody in the company can make any decision as long as you seek the advice from everybody that decision will affect. So that might be a very small decision that you might want to make. You can go to the 2 or 3 people that affects. You can say like, hey, I want to do this for this reason, and I want to change how we do this, and do you see any problems with that? And you seek their advice, and that's all you have to do. And then you can make an informed decision. If it's a big decision that affects hundreds of people in your organization, well, then that needs a big focus of advice and buy-in. So you would go to all the people and you'd write out a project plan. You'd come up with the whys behind it to tell people why you want to do this. You'd take straw polls and make sure that you can go in this direction. So using the advice process to avoid sort of consensus building, which can take a lot of time. And sometimes people don't feel like they actually believe in the consensus anyway. So figuring out how to have a decision owned by a single person, and their responsibility is to get everybody's opinion on it, the advice process. Okay, sense and respond. This is to react and grow in a complex, ever-changing environment. So like I said earlier, everything's complex, always changing. Don't spend a bunch of human hours building the best perfect solution for 5 years from now. Don't build a platform, this month that'll have a million customers, that's built for 1 million customers if you only have 100 customers, because something will suffer. The customer will suffer because of that. So requirements change, the business will change, understand all of that. There's no need to plan everything out. Just expect the direction to change and shift. One of the Teal companies from this book has this great idea that they're a manufacturing company, but they say they're like farmers. We look 20 years ahead, but we plan a month ahead. If you farm like an orange organization, you'd sit down in March and you'd write out your plant date and you'd write out your harvest date and you'd plan out all the weather that you're going to have, and you'd sit there and you'd run budgets on it, and you'd get an expert to come in and present pie charts, and that's how you would farm. But we all know farming doesn't work like that. Your harvest date isn't set until you know how the season went. So the same idea is true in Teal organizations, where they're constantly inputting information from the environment. They're sensing the business through all of the employees that are involved in the business. All of the low-level teams who are out there and working in the business, they understand more about that part of the business than anybody else in the business. And they can input all that data and help build decisions and help respond to that. On a very literal level, this could be seen as monitoring and fixing something. So one of the five DevOps pillars, one of them is monitoring. So this might be like monitoring and sensing. We probe our environment, we sense all these servers, we input all this information, and then we can figure out how to respond to that. Maybe the response is like, we need to add more resources because things are getting busy. Or maybe the responding is like, we need to take a look at this giant latency spike here and see what happened with that. So on a very literal sense, sensing and responding could be like DevOps monitoring. But just acknowledge the complex nature of the work that we do. What we do is really complex, and then test out different ideas and safe to fail experiments and figure out a way to like respond to the customer needs as you go. Agile is great at that. The last slide I'll put up here is about local changes. So the role of a CEO in a Teal company is to really set culture. They trust that they hired the people and they put the right people into their organization to do the hard work. I mean, arguably, the CEO's job is the hardest if you're setting culture every day. But the idea is that they should really hold space for Teal practices. So Teal companies are really rare. You may not work for one. You may not want to work for one. But I think that there's a great value in local changes. If you lead people, if you manage people, incorporating Teal practices into your DevOps practice will certainly help bring employee engagement. And I think that there's a real possibility that individual teams can be run as Teal teams, and sort of your leader or your manager in this area becomes then sort of like a buffer between you and the rest of the organization. So maybe the rest of the organization is orange or green, but your team, your manager can translate things into a Teal environment for you. So budgets, OKRs, things like that. If your manager stops those things at their level and says like, instead of OKRs, maybe they say like, oh, how are we going to do great things for the customer this quarter? Translating it from one language to another language, and in making some local changes, because change is really hard. In order to have a vertical change, meaning to take an orange company and transform it to a Teal company, you need buy-in at all levels, and you need true like CEO level, hey, we're doing this and this is why, and we're committed to this for a long time. If there's a board of investors or a board like that, you need board level buy-in. You need C-level buy-in for Teal, vertical Teal changes. I think there's a lot of opportunity for sort of horizontal changes, for local changes, for teams to sort of adopt some Teal practices and to shift the company from maybe amber-ish color to a more orange color or something like that on a local level, even if you can't affect change in your whole organization. So that's my talk. And I will take questions now if there are any. The resources here, DevOps Topologies is a great website. Also, after Laloux came out with his book, Reinventing Organizations, people from around the world started contributing to this wiki. They started being like, hey, I work for one of these companies that you're talking about. This is what we do about budgeting. This is what we do about meetings. And so he started aggregating that into a wiki. You can check out Teal business practices. And you can Google Teal in terms of like business practices and come out with a bunch of stuff. So the last thing I'll say is, like, once you read this book, this Reinventing Organizations is a great book. You should all read it no matter what level you're at. Like, if you manage people, obviously, if you lead people, it's really great. If you own your own company, definitely read it. But if you're into consulting, if you work with other companies, if you're an individual contributor on a team, I still think it's of high value to read. It helps you understand where you identify with as a company. It helped explain, like, the last 15 years of my employment, the last 15 years of my career. It helped explain it in one book, why I was unhappy at this place, why I was definitely very happy at this other place. It helped explain all of that. And so anyway, I highly recommend it and hope that you got something out of it. So that's it. Good? Question? All right, I'll hang out for a little bit if anybody wants to talk on something.
So I do have a question, if no one else has a question. So you called out one of the anti-patterns, and I agree that over the long term it is anti-patterns, that you have a separate DevOps team. Now, that actually looks, or can look, very similar to a DevOps Center of Excellence or a Cloud Center of Excellence. But the difference is that instead of pulling, well, I'll ask, what do you see the differences as between those two models? Because like from the pictures, they kind of look the same.
Yes. Yeah, so the question is, how do you reconcile the DevOps silo, Antitype, and also the DevOps Center of Excellence, which seems to be some dedicated type of people doing the work? So ultimately, I really think it comes down to how these things are implemented from a collaboration point of view. If you erect a DevOps silo in the middle here just to have it operate forever and ever, then this will not work in the long term. If this is a stepping stone, the idea that, hey, let's bring in some people who know about these tools, let's get them talking to our teams about practices. You can use this team as in the short term to pull the other two closer together. So you can use the DevOps team for a period of time, let's say 6 months or a year or something, to really pull the other areas of your business together. Get them interested in what DevOps philosophies and practices are. Get them working on the same things that you're working on, and sort of, the ultimate goal where there's big collaboration between the two. And then remember that organizational change, to keep it perpetual, is a struggle in and of itself. How many times have you heard somebody come in to your team and say, hey, we're at change, how we do something, this is it, here's your document, and that's it. And it works for a couple weeks, but it's hard or something's wrong with it, and people go back to their own ways. Remember, knowledge is embedded in organizations now, such that it's hard to get out of those patterns. It's hard to break ourselves free of those old ways of thinking. So I really like the center of excellence as the idea that, yes, we get collaboration, but sort of there's this sort of constant coaching that happens, a reinforcement of DevOps. You might not need to talk, operations might not need to talk with software development every day on a certain software product, but when they do, they're there. When they do, they come together. It's sort of this reminding everybody, like, yeah, we do this thing together. We work together for this single outcome. So I really see this as, if you use this as a temporary pattern, then I think that it can be good. And same thing with the Cloud Center of Excellence. You don't want to leave those people out there too long. If they're working on the ops team and they're sitting on a dev team, you can kind of bring them back in. You can send them out. It's sort of change morphing based on the needs of the product itself. Good distinction.
So just a follow-up. So what you're saying is essentially, if an organization is just starting out, you can just start off as an anti-type and then you can actually transform into essentially the ideal model.
Yeah, so the question is, I think I showed this anti-pattern here for startups. And long-term, this won't work, but the answer is yes. If you're starting out like this is an okay way to start out with. And it is well suited for that chaotic environment of a startup where you're not pivoting quarterly, you're pivoting daily. You try something one day and you're trying something else the next day, and it's very fluid and it's chaotic. And so I think that, using this sort of model where you don't have a budget to hire, 10 systems engineers that work on AWS or something like that. You have a budget for one person or a developer who builds infrastructure. So long term, I think that's hard to scale. But in the short term, I think that is what many startups do and do successfully. It's figuring out how to get out of this pattern and how to bring up an operations team out of nothing. And then work with developers to say, like, all right, you did a good job from day 0 to day 365, and now we're bringing on some more people who understand operations in a deeper sense.
So basically here we're assuming that the skill set of the DevOps team is the same for all models, right?
The question is the skill set the same for all the models? And I think it's very topology specific. So in that one that's very overlapped with each other, you'd see the skill set of somebody on this team being very overlapped. Not entirely homogenous, but you'd see the emergence of people who can both write software and understand infrastructure to some degree. Now, we don't expect people on this team to worry about multi-home BGP routing or like cooling and power in a data center. Those are sort of like networking and operations specific things. But if all of that is abstracted away by your platform, your infrastructure as a service platform, i.e. AWS or Azure or something, then that sort of changes that traditional ops responsibility to be more software focused. And because of that, you can have somebody who knows how to both write software and run infrastructure from a cloud provider. So sometimes the roles are the same and sometimes they're very different. And it's different for every organization and every person. You might have a software person that used to do operations 10 years ago and now they write software. That's all they do, but they still have that ops aware mindset. And you might have developers that are like, oh, I'm kind of interested in writing some code over here. Can I, tinker around in your area? That helps too. So, any other questions today? All right, cool. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, so